Hello, and welcome to the podcast series entitled In the Footsteps of St. Francis de Sales. My name is Father John O'Neill, and I am an oblate of St. Francis de Sales. It will be my pleasure to be your host as we journey in the footsteps of this great saint. In this podcast, we will focus on the major details of the marvelous stained glass windows in the Basilica. Should you be using this podcast apart from the one on the Basilica of the Visitation and its museum, you should know that the Basilica is built on a high hill readily visible from the town and is located at 11 Avenue de la Visitation. The 12 stained glass windows of the Basilica depict scenes and themes from the lives of both Saints Francis de Sales on the left side of the church and Saint Jane de Chantal on the right. I am deeply indebted to my deceased confrere, Father Robert McGilvery, OSFS, for his detailed slide pictures of the windows and their descriptions. There is also available an even more detailed description of the windows, which can be found online at web1.desales.edu/assets/Salesian/pdf/Annecy window. First, we will cover the windows dedicated to the major events associated with the life of St. Francis de Sales, after which we can consider those important aspects of the windows dedicated to St. Jane de Chantal. In order to see the windows in detail, each one will be divided into at least 3 sections, beginning at the top and proceeding downward to the final pane, which is a text relevant to the major theme of each window. The text will be in French, but we will make an effort to translate it as accurately as possible. In the first window, we see the theme of childhood and adolescence of St. Francis de Sales. At the top, we have the coat of arms of Monsieur de Boissy, Francis's father on the left, and that of Françoise Sinonaz, his mother, on the right. Below that, at Padua, between November 1588 to January 1592, before an important panel on September 5, 1591, Guy Mancirolo, professor of Roman law and rector of the University of Padua, crowned his most brilliant student, Francis de Sales, a doctor in civil law and in ecclesiastical law. In the next frame, at the College of Clermont in Paris, between the autumn of 1582 and the summer of 1589, were teachers and students called Francis the Angel of the College. He was assailed by a temptation against faith, which lasted 6 weeks. One evening in January 1587, in the church of Saint Etienne de Grès, presently destroyed, he implored Our Lady of Good Deliverance. He recited the Memorare, and the Virgin Mary delivered him from this trial. In recognition of this, Francis made a vow to say his rosary every day. This statue is venerated nowadays in the chapel of the Sisters of St. Thomas of Villanova at Neuilly-sur-Seine. A replica of the statue can be found on the campus of De Sales University in Center Valley, Pennsylvania. In the central pane, entitled The Grand Scene, in March of 1593, accompanied by his cousin Louis, Francis, the firstborn of the family of 13 children, and dressed in his garb as the Lord of Villarogue, asked his father's permission to become a priest. Strongly affected, his father ceded to the desire of his son, but not without showing him first his title, granted on the 24th of November 1592, as advocate to the Sovereign Senate of Savoy. In the bottom panel of the window, we see the saint's supplication, translated into English: "May it please you, my Father, to permit me to become a member of the Church." Francis' entreaty of his father that he might become a priest. The second window, dedicated to St. Francis de Sales, has the theme of provost, priest, and missionary from the years of 1594 to 1602. At the top of the first panel, we have the coat of arms for Savoy on the left and the city of Thonon on the right. The image of St. Francis de Sales depicts the time in 1594 when he received the mission to convert the Chablais. He had taken up residence in the region of Thonon, and at the end of February and the beginning of March of 1595. Each morning he went to celebrate Mass in the chapel of Saint Etienne de Marin at Mongy, situated on the right bank of the Dranse River, which continued to be Catholic because it was then dependent upon the Valais. Lacking a bridge, Francis used to cross the river flat on his face on an icy log which served as a footbridge. In the next panel, we see that having served the missions during the day throughout the Chablais, each evening from the 14th of September until October 1598, so as not to upset the Protestants, he and his faithful servant, Georges Roland, took refuge approximately 6 kilometers from Thonon at the Chateau of Les Alanges, a Catholic fortress guarded by the Baron of Hermance in the name of the Duke of Savoy. The fortress is presently under the care of the missionaries of St. Francis de Sales. In the next panel, we see that after he was ordained a priest on December the 18th, 1593, Francis was installed just after Christmas as provost of the chapel in the presence of Bishop Claude de Granier, the Bishop of Annecy-Geneva, in the Church of the Cordeliers, dedicated to St. Francis of Assisi, which became the Cathedral of Annecy on February 3, 1772, under the title of St. Peter in Chains. In the grand scene at the base of the window depicts that on the month of October 1598, on the occasion of 40 hours, the Apostle of the Chablais received at Thonon the official conversion of that region. Nearby Francis, presiding at the ceremony, are the papal legate, Cardinal Alexander de Medici, later Pope Leo XI, and the Duke of Savoy, Charles Emmanuel the Great. Before them, a Protestant petitions his entry into the Catholic Church. Below the grand scene, there is a text written in Old French, the translation of which is, "Give place in our midst those who are ours, that they may come to my right." It's with these words that on October 6, 1598, the Duke of Savoy invited some notable persons of the Chablais to convert. Respectful of the liberty of conscience, St. Francis de Sales intervened in order to preserve from exile the Protestants who, in good faith, would not consent to become Catholic. Now moving on to the third window, the theme of which is Francis de Sales, Bishop and Prince of Geneva, from 1602 to 1622. We see at the top of the window is the depiction of the coat of arms of St. Francis de Sales as Prince-Bishop of Geneva in residence in Annecy. This scene also depicts the miracle of the crucifix. In 1606, at the request of the Sovereign Synod of Savoy, Francis de Sales preached the Lenten sermons in the Church of St. Dominic of Chambéry, the primary pulpit of Savoy. On Good Friday, March 24th, he spoke of the Passion, a crucifix of high stature, which hung over the tribune, became illuminated and projected its luminous rays on the saint. Pictured in the same frame is a depiction of St. Francis de Sales preaching in the presence of the King Henry IV. In the next frame, we see a depiction of St. Francis with his companions crossing the Saône River. In the panel depicting the grand scene next, we see that Francis de Sales, who had been named coadjutor bishop 4 years earlier, had deferred, out of humility, receiving the episcopal consecration during the lifetime of his predecessor, Bishop de Granier. After Bishop de Granier's death, Francis was consecrated on December the 8th, 1602, in the village of his birth at Touron, situated approximately 20 kilometers from Annecy. The consecrating bishop was Monsignor Vespasien Garibaldi, who was Bishop of Vienne in Dauphiné. We can note in the panel with the text below the episcopal consecration, St. Francis de Sales was favored with intellectual lights concerning the Most Holy Trinity and the Glorious Virgin. Then, according to witness, as translated from the French, reads, "As if a stranger to the world, his face became radiant." Now approaching the fourth window, the theme of which is St. Francis de Sales, Doctor of the Church and patron of journalists and Catholic writers. At the top of the window, we see the coat of arms of the Bishop of Geneva on the left and of the Order of the Visitation on the right. Below those, we see that in 1606, St. Francis de Sales founded, along with Senator Antoine Favre, and in his ancient house on the Rue Saint-Clair, number 18, the Fleury-Montaigne Academy of Arts, Sciences, and Letters, the first in the French language. In the next panel below, we see that St. Francis de Sales, who composed the introduction to Devout Life with the aid of counsels given to Madame de Chamoisy, who is represented in the window and designated in the book under the name of Philothea, meaning one who loves God. The book was published in 1608 and was reprinted more than 40 times during the saint's life, and translated in the principal language of the entire world of the time, and incorporated into the program of the university. The Introduction to Devout Life is classified among the masterpieces of religious, literary art, and spirituality. It remains the most read work after the Bible and the Imitation of Christ, demonstrating most effectively the possibility for all Christians to attain sanctity. In the segment below, we see in the grand scene that in 1606, the Holy Doctor is depicted in discussion with a Dominican and a Jesuit on the subject of the accord between divine grace and human will, a question highly debated at the time. We see that in the grand scene, the major theme reflects in St. Francis de Sales completing his work entitled The Treatise on the Love of God in 1660. The text in the panel below the grand scene, translating from the French, "Here for certain I am speaking for souls advanced in devotion. With these words, which are taken from the preface to the treatise, is considered a continuation and complement of the introduction to the Devout Life." Moving on now to window 5, which has the theme of St. Francis de Sales as administrator of a diocese of nearly 600 parishes. At the top of the window, we have the coat of arms of two organizations that existed during the Second World War. The first on the left is the Order of the Franciscains, the coat of arms of the Vichy government, established in 1941. The coat of arms on the right is the Order of les Combattants, which was established also during the Second World War and was a symbol of the resistance in France to the German government. If the description of these two coats of arms is accurate, I'm not certain why they would be included in this particular window. In the panel directly below the coat of arms, we see that Francis got around his diocese mounted on a mule from the years of 1605 to 1609, and whenever he arrived in a locality, he was sure to bless the parishioners of the region. In the panel below that, we see that in September of 1609, Francis passed the Bridge of the Rhone, presently called the Pont d'Ile, in Geneva, by which he would enter into the country of Gex, above Geneva, which had submitted to his jurisdiction. Some spectators looked on with astonishment at this bishop traversing the city of Geneva, raising their arms in protest. At the time, that region was entirely Protestant, both spiritually and temporally. In the next panel, we see that St. Francis de Sales, in 1619 in Paris, encountered his great friend St. Vincent de Paul. He established him as the ecclesiastical superior of the Visitandines of the capital, a function which he would fulfill until his death nearly 40 years later. In the grand scene, we see that Francis, after a long trip to Paris, with Bishop Henri de Gondi, Cardinal of Retz, and Bishop of Paris, with the agreement of the king, proposed to make him coadjutor bishop by giving him the Abbey of Sainte-Geneviève. In the text below the grand scene, we see that St. Francis de Sales declined the offer and responded from the French, quote, "I do not feel it necessary to change a poor woman for a rich one," end quotes, meaning a poor diocese, namely Annecy or Geneva, for a rich one, that of Paris. Moving now to the sixth and final window in the series related to St. Francis de Sales, we have window 6, which the theme is Charity, Death, and the Apotheosis, or Elevation to Glory of the Saint. You will notice at the very top of the window there are the coat of arms of the city of Annecy on the left and that of the city of Lyon on the right. Just beneath the coat of arms, St. Francis de Sales in the courtyard of the house of his friend Antoine Favre, where he lived from 1610 until his death, at Rue Saint-Clair, number 18. The charitable bishop would give alms to the poor each day for an entire hour, occasionally distributing some of his own vestments. Upon returning from the courts of France and Savoy at Avignon, the saint died at Lyon on December 28, 1622, of a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 55. He died in the hut of the gardener of the monastery of the Visitation of Belcourt. He was assisted by the Vicar General Menard, by a seraphic religious, by Brother Guillaume Armand, a Jesuit as infirmarian, and by Sister Marie Cecile, the out-sister of the Visitation. In the main scene of the window, we see St. Francis de Sales is elevated to glory by the angels. The significant dates in the saint's history after his death are his beatification, December 28, 1661, his canonization, which took place on April 19, 1665, the date that he was declared Doctor of the Church, which is November 16, 1877, and he was named the patron of journalists January 26, 1923. In the bottom panel below the main scene, we see the text, which is translated in English, "Deliver my soul from the prison of the body, so that I might chant the praises of your holy name." These were the words pronounced by Francis de Sales just before dying. You may wish now to pause the podcast at this point before turning your attention to the windows related to the life of St. Jane. The first window, dedicated to the major events in the life of St. Jane de Chantal, we see in the first window the theme of infancy, childhood, and marriage from 1572 to 1592. At the top of the window, we see the coats of arms of the two families of Frémyot, which would have been Jane's father, and de Beaubasset, that of her mother. Immediately below the coat of arms, we have the scene of Jane's marriage. She, at 20 years of age, on December 29, 1592, at the chateau of Beaubilly, the Côte d'Or, Jane married Christopher II, Baron of Raboutin-de-Chantal, aged 27, and last descended by maternal line of the family of St. Bernard. The couple is surrounded by noble members of their respective families. In the next panel, we see St. Jane at the age of 5, affirming her faith to a Protestant. In the next panel, we see that during the Wars of Religion in 1589, Jane fled the person who was attempting, though in vain, to tempt her to all sorts of worldly lures. In the grand scene of the window, at the point of turning 20 years of age, Jane used to devote long moments to prayer at the feet of the Holy Virgin. Next to her stands her father, Monsieur Benin Frémyot. In the panel below the grand scene, in Old French and translated in English therefrom, I quote, "If I would not love the poor, it seems that I would not love God." It was a phrase found on the lips of Jane since her early childhood. Moving now to the second window, we encounter the theme of St. Jane's life as wife, mother, and matron of the poor from 1592 to 1601. At the top of the window, we see the coat of arms of Raboutin-Chantal and that of Frémyot, St. Jane's husband, and that of her family. In the scene immediately below the coat of arms, we see that at Beaubilly in 1601, Madame de Chantal kneels praying for her husband lying on the ground, who had been accidentally and mortally wounded by his cousin while they were hunting. In the next panel below, we see St. Jane at the Château of Montherlant from 1602 to 1610, very close to Autun. The young Christian widow aids the poor and cares for the sick each day. In the panel of the grand scene, we see that in 1601, St. Jane, mother of 6 children in 8 years of marriage, with her husband near her, is surrounded by 4 survivors, Cels Benin, age 5, who will later marry Marie de Collange and will be the father of Madame de Savigny, Marie Aimée, age 2½, future spouse of Bernard de Sales, the younger brother of St. Francis de Sales, Baron of Touraine, Françoise, at 15 months, who will marry the Count of Toulon-Gillon, and Charlotte in the arms of her mother, who was born just 3 weeks before the death of her father in 1601, and who would die at the age of 9. In the panel at the bottom of the window, we see the French expression, the translation of which, "Take all that I have in the world, Lord, but leave me my dear husband." This was a prayer of St. Jane, model of spouses, beside her dying husband. Now moving to window number 3, for St. Jane de Chantal, we have the theme of widowhood and her as a spiritual directee of St. Francis de Sales between 1601 and 1610. At the top again we have the coat of arms of the Frémillots and Raboutin families. And in 1604, Francis de Sales preached the Lenten sermons in the Sainte-Chapelle of the palace of the Duke of Bourgogne in Dijon. On March 5th, the Friday after Ash Wednesday, the preacher noticed near the pulpit a very attractive young widow. It was Madame de Chantal. Both recognized each other as being seen miraculously in a dream and in their role as future founders of an order of women religious. This double vision took place for him some days before Lent, and for her already in 1601. In February of 1604, at the Château de Sales in Touraine, the place of his birth, St. Francis prepared his Lenten sermons. One morning, after having celebrated his Mass in the family chapel dedicated to St. Sebastian, he perceived the first 3 persons by whom he would later establish the Order of the Visitation of Holy Mary, namely Madame de Chantal, with a halo, and Mademoiselles de Brochard and Favre. In the grand scene of the window, we see at Dijon, presented by her brother, the Archbishop of Bourges, André Frémillot, Madame de Chantal had recourse to the spiritual wisdom and insights of the Blessed St. Francis de Sales. In the panel below the grand scene, we see the French, which is translated as, "It is quite true that it is the will of God that I charge myself with your spiritual conduct." These were the words by which St. Francis de Sales accepted to become St. Jane's spiritual guide on the 22nd of August, 1604. In the 4th window dedicated to St. Jane de Chantal, we have her as religious and founder of the Order of the Visitation between 1610 and 1641. At the top of the window, we have the coat of arms of St. Jane de Chantal and that of the Order of the Visitation. Also in the top frame, we have, on Monday, March 29, 1610, Madame de Chantal left Dijon in order to found in Annecy the Order of the Visitation. She had previously confided to President Frémillot the education of her son, Cels Benin. Her heart broken, but her soul valiant, she responded to Monsieur Robert, the tutor of the children, who was astonished by the tears with her eyes were filled. She said, "Don't forget, sir, I am their mother." Charlotte would die at 9 years of age, and Marie Aimée, having married the Baron of Touraine, lived with the de Sales family near Annecy. Madame de Chantal would continue to concern herself with her children, their situation, and their future. From 1612 to 1618, the Sisters of the Visitation used to go 2 by 2, 2 hours a day, to aid the poor and to care for the sick of the city of Annecy. On the pressing invitation of Monseigneur de Maucomont, Archbishop of Lyon, St. Francis de Sales would give them the full cloister on October 16, 1618. let one know well that the particular task of the visitandines had not been the visiting of the poor, as their name seems to indicate. They are visitandines primarily because they must live according to the spirit of an evangelical mystery, namely that of the Visitation, united in intimate piety, humility, and fraternal charity. In the grand scene, next to the image of St. Francis de Sales, we see at the Rue de la Providence the cradle of the Visitation, called the Gallery, and presently incorporated in the convent of St. Joseph of Annecy. The first out-sister, Anne Jacqueline Coste, receives from a servant of Senator Antoine Favre some bread, some wine, and some meat for the little community the day after its foundation. In the grand scene itself, we see that on Trinity Sunday, which coincided with the feast of St. Claude, June 6, 1610, in the oratory of his bishop's house, the Lambert House, at number 15, Rue Jean-Jacques Rousseau, St. Francis de Sales laid down a rough draft of the rule for St. Jane de Chantal and her two companions, Sister Charlotte de Bréchard and Marie Jacqueline Favre. In the panel below the grand scene, we see written in French and translated in English as, "Follow this way, my most dear daughter, and make follow it all those whom heaven has destined to follow in your steps." It was the instruction that St. Francis de Sales gave to St. Jane de Chantal on the day of the foundation of the congregation. We now direct our attention to window number 5 in the life of St. Jane de Chantal, with the theme entitled "With the Good People of Annecy and the Court of France in 1641. At the very top of the window, we have the coat of arms of France on the left and the coat of arms of the Visitation on the right. Perhaps it would be helpful at this point to explain the coat of arms of the Order of the Visitation of Holy Mary. In a letter dated June 10, 1611, St. Francis de Sales wrote to Mother de Chantal, saying, "We should take as our coat of arms a single heart pierced by 2 arrows, the whole enclosed in a crown of thorns, and with the poor heart serving to hold and support a cross which is to surmount it, and the heart is to be engraved with the sacred names of Jesus and Mary." St. Francis continues to elaborate, "Our little congregation is the work of the hearts of Jesus and Mary. Our dying Savior gave birth to us by the wound in his sacred heart. It is therefore perfectly right that by constant mortification of our own heart should always remain surrounded by the crown of thorns, which once rested on our Master's head, while love held him pinned to the throne of his mortal sufferings." Also in this same frame, we can see that on July 28, 1641, as a sign of veneration, the people of Annecy kissed the hands of St. Jane de Chantal as she was leaving for Moulins in order to give there the veil to the Duchess of Montmorency. In the next panel below, we see St. Jane de Chantal welcoming Anne of Austria. In the grand scene of the window, we see the Queen presenting to Jane de Chantal the Dauphin, who later became Louis XIV, and asked her to bless him. Despite all her excuses, she obliged her to give him her blessing and made him kneel in order to receive it. In the bottom panel of the window below the grand scene, we see written in French and translated into English, "Goodbye, my dear daughters, until eternity." These were the last words of Mother de Chantal to the Visitandines of Paris on November the 11th, 1641, when she realized her death was approaching. We now come to the sixth and final window depicting the life of St. Jane de Chantal. In this panel, we will see the death and the apotheosis or elevation into heaven. In the panel at the very top of the window, we see the coat of arms on the left of Moulins and on the right of Montmorency. And also included is a depiction of St. Jane de Chantal's last meeting with St. Francis de Sales. In this last dialogue which St. Jane had with St. Francis de Sales in Lyon on Monday, December 12, 1622, he permitted her to speak only of the affairs of the Visitation. At the bottom in the scene is the Cathedral of St. John of Lyon. In the next panel, we see that during the course of a Mass For the repose of the soul of Saint Jane de Chantal, St. Vincent de Paul saw two globes of fire, symbolizing the soul of St. Francis de Sales and that of St. Jane de Chantal, blending into a third, representing the divinity. From this vision, it occurred to him as an interior sentiment that these two souls were in heaven and that they had no need of our prayers. To the right of the globes is the Church of the Sacred Heart of Moulins. In the final panel, we see the apotheosis of St. Jane de Chantal, surrounded by angels as she ascends into glory. St. Jane Françoise Frémilloux de Chantal was beatified on the 12th of November 1751 and canonized on July 16, 1767. In the bottom panel of the window, we see the text written in French and translated into English, "As my mother, do you not wish to go before the spouse who is coming?" "Yes, my father, I am going there." This was the question that was posed by the Jesuit Father de Langedais, who assisted the saint a few moments before her unexpected death at the monastery of the Visitation of Moulins on Friday, December 13, 1641, at 6:30 in the evening. The response of the dying one showed her to the priest as appearing before God, and thus dies the saint. This concludes our tour of the stained glass windows of the Monastery of the Visitation in Annecy. I thank you for joining me, and I hope that you will continue your journey in the footsteps of St. Francis de Sales, both historically and spiritually, in some of the other podcasts available in this series.